just saying this looks like very intimidating, so please be kind. Good afternoon, everybody. Good. Okay, thank you. Make us feel better. So my name is Katell. I work at INSEAD, the business school, where I integrate sustainability into business education, right? To change business so that business leaders and managers are going to do more about it. So that's my objective here today. I'm just moderating a conversation on nature-based solution. And I hope more people are coming in the room because that's an important conversation. I'm super happy it's on the big stage. Typically, we don't have nature on the big stage in conferences, only in Change Now, so that's a good thing. So nature-based solutions are actually actions or intentional inactions that we can do to use nature to solve societal challenges. That's what we're going to be discussing here today. There is a series of experts, of people developing these solutions that we're going to bring on stage for you. And so I'm delighted to welcome for the first session Fabien and Julien, who are supposed to come when the jingle comes. Yes, that works. I know. See, it was okay, right? So it's okay. If I can do it, you can do it. Yeah, you take one of these. And so in this session, we're going to be focusing on rewilding, right? That's a topic that we're going to be talking about. But before we do that, clearly the whole topic of nature is moving up in the, in the international agenda for business in particular, right? Following COP15 in December. Also, the science-based target for nature were released yesterday, right? So the instruments also coming up. And so I wanted to ask you, Julien, as a start to set the stage before we go into rewilding. You are working for Cartier for Nature. You're an expert on biodiversity, on nature. That's what you've done your whole life. Why should business care about nature? And what does Cartier for Nature do about that?
Yes, thank you very much, Katell, and good afternoon, everyone. So I think I will start with the basics and to repeat again that we all rely on nature for our living and also for our economy. And nature is also sending us signals like heat waves or severe droughts in Kenya or floodings in Germany. And these signals, they tell us that we have gone beyond the limits. And we heard this morning very often. And we have gone beyond the limits because our development has been at the expense of the environment. So we have now to care for nature. And caring for nature means we need to put more efforts, put more resources. And by resources, I also mean funding resources. And if we look at the scale of the challenge, we also all know that public funding will not be enough. We cannot rely on only public funding to address those challenges, and everybody has to play a part, including the business sector. So now to come to your question, why Cartier also engage in that endeavor? Yes, what is important is that on first end, Cartier has a very ambitious CSR strategy to measure, to reduce, and to mitigate its impact. And because, and I insist it's important, because this is already in place, then the Cartier wanted to do more and to play a proactive role and to also act beyond its operations, and hence the creation of a philanthropic initiative, Cartier for Nature. So we are a foundation, we do grants, we support NGOs across the world that are engaged for the protection and restoration of healthy ecosystems. And we look for organizations that are able to measure and also to have an impact and that are engaged over the long term. And this is how we came to know Rewilding Europe here.
Okay, thanks. So clearly what you're saying is that it's an extra step of commitment through investment, and this is why this foundation has been created to do that, as one of the way corporates can indeed invest in nature. And so one of the organizations that Cartier for Nature is investing in is Rewilding Europe, where you are the head of landscape. So can you explain to me, again, because I've done it, but for the audience, what is rewilding? What does that mean?
All right. Thank you. So what is rewilding? That's an interesting question. It's an approach to conservation and ecological restoration that Rewilding Europe has been pioneering across Europe for over a decade now. And there's different ways of summarizing it. One is that is a little bit catchy, is that it's a little bit like the gold standard of ecological restoration. It's a way of harnessing nature's forces to enable it to restore itself as much as possible. So it's about giving more space to nature, giving time for nature also to restore itself, and drive the kind of large-scale and long-term transformations that we need for nature recovery, for addressing climate change, both through mitigation and adaptation. And also, and this is, I think, an interesting dimension, there's also a clear human dimension to the way rewilding is practiced, because many of the places where this kind of large-scale, long-term transformation is possible are also places that often are lacking a little bit of perspectives in terms of their economic and social development. There are many places in Europe where rural peoples and landscapes are struggling.
So can you give us a very concrete example of one of the rewilding projects that you are conducting in Europe, for instance?
Yeah, so one of these landscapes that I was mentioning is in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. So this is an area that has suffered from quite severe depopulation. People have left the countryside. Their way of life was not economically viable. They had better opportunities in Bucharest, elsewhere in Europe. And so the land was abandoned, and they were lacking perspective. So what we did there, as part of our rewilding strategies, we brought back European bison. So this is a big mammal. It weighs, adult males weigh over a ton. And if you have a big herd of bison in a natural ecosystem, they have a significant effect on the biodiversity there. And they help maintain the kind of mosaic of grasslands and shrublands and forests that make this landscape what it is and what it was, and that enhance the biodiversity there. But what's interesting is that the people that are still living in this landscape, they now have this new asset, the bison, that they can build a whole new economy around. And so we're helping them do that. We're investing in building capacity, providing technical advice, but also funding so that they can create new tourism-related businesses where people come to this landscape and they can come and visit the bison, see the bison, and this provides jobs, income opportunities for local people, and there's plenty of young entrepreneurs who are seizing this opportunity now. And
so when we were preparing, you also said, because of the title of this whole session, Nature-Based Solution, that rewilding was not a solution, that it was an approach. Can you tell a bit more about that?
Well, I think, so we're working on multiple dimensions of these landscapes. The ecological side, so we're, in the case of Romania, introducing an ecosystem engineer, a large species that's going to bring new dynamics to this ecosystem. We're working also on the social and economic dimensions of this landscape, working with local people on creating jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities. We're also working on the culture and making sure that this bison that is now there is something that people value, and that they feel proud of, and that it becomes something that's really fully appropriated. And so it's this kind of multi-pronged approach that makes this transformative, and I think this is what separates rewilding from just another technical fix, if you like, to the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, thanks for that. Is that what attracted Cartier for Nature into investing in these particular projects, rather than a more, let's say, classic protection or restoration effort?
Yes, exactly. I think we like the approach that it's based on ecosystem functions.
Yeah.
It's complex, of course, but it's having an impact on biodiversity, climate, and people. And it's also showing that, restoring nature is a big engagement. It can take decades. So it's not a simple solution. You need to take into consideration all the elements, and you need to also have good science. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason you mentioned, it's an approach, and it's a positive approach. It's a mindset, it's a positive mindset. It's about bringing back lost species into those landscapes. It's also about bringing back people and economic opportunities in this landscape. So it's really changing the narrative also, and to see the nature as an opportunity.
Right. So how is that different from the more, let's say, traditional philanthropic approach to, let's say, protecting nature? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, all the mechanisms that Fabien just highlighted, that they take time.
Right.
They are engaged in very large landscapes across the globe, in Europe, with multiple partners. So many things can happen along the way. And if we want to support them in the right way, we need to provide them with a lot of maximum of flexibility.
You mean flexibility of the funding?
Exactly.
With no conditionality, right?
Exactly. So this is what differs from maybe traditional philanthropy, which is maybe based more on project-based approach or restricted funding. And this is, so we call it unrestricted funding. And this is something that maybe corporate foundation can do, because we don't have the constraints that maybe investors or, let's say, some public agency they have. So yes, providing flexibility and also maybe seeing beyond your funding support, because with this layer of flexible funding, the organization is also able to play with other sources of funding, such as public funding or maybe de-risking for investment. So this is also leveraging funding. And I said at the beginning, we need more and more funding towards
And are you helping them directly with that, this connection that you have through Cartier with public organization, or de-risking, targeting particular investors to invest more in the project?
I would say not directly, but we are having discussions, and we need to understand also where are their needs and how we can best support them.
Right. And typically also traditional philanthropy on nature tends to focus on the global south, no? So what was the interest for you to invest in Europe?
Exactly, because it's in Europe. And also showing that you can have the same approaches that you have in the global south, but you can also have them in Europe at our doors. And one of the landscape in Spain is maybe only 2 hours drive from Madrid. So you have the population of Madrid that can directly access those projects.
So it's an important message, I think, to give, is that we don't need to go far away. And we have discussion in other sessions about different geographies, but there is plenty of work to do in Europe in rewilding. So clearly we understand the dynamic of this type of supporter, a philanthropy that can provide long-term de-risk for others. Can you give an illustration of a project where a corporate directly invests in a rewilding project? Do you have an illustration?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, of course, we're very grateful for Cartier for Nature to be supporting our work in Romania, and it is a long-term initiative. We started the work there over 10 years ago now in partnership with WWF, in fact, and there's still a lot of work to do because we need to change people's mindsets and build a whole new economy there.
So what type of a time frame are we talking about, roughly, just to get an idea? You said
a few decades, probably.
A few decades.
I mean, there's a number of steps, of course, and we see results already. But the kind of transformation we're aiming for is systemic. It's not just a project. It's not just a solution, as we were saying. It's broader and deeper than that.
Yeah.
It does bring opportunities for investment. So we've been supporting local people in creating these guest houses or having small businesses locally owned businesses. These are all investment opportunities. And so we are channeling some private investment into those ventures. But it's, of course, difficult to scale rapidly. The kinds of volumes we're speaking of are somewhat limited, so it's a particular kind of investor that's going to be interested by this. But there are other places where there's a stronger enabling environment for corporate investment. And the example I have in mind is the work we're doing in Scotland, where there is an established mechanism to generate revenue from selling carbon credits from woodland restoration and peatland restoration. And so we're harnessing this opportunity to go further and scale up our rewilding efforts there. And this is really a very important opportunity, I think, for rewilding to contribute to, in particular, the climate challenge. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with what a peatland is, these are ecosystems where the soil contains a very high concentration or proportion of organic matter that has not decomposed, so dead leaves, dead roots, and it hasn't decomposed because the soil is saturated with water permanently, so there's no oxygen reaching this organic matter, and so it stays there. And this is all carbon that's staying in the soil. And it's one of the biggest natural stores of carbon on the planet, across mostly the global north. And the thing is that, in particular in Europe, we've been very good at draining these peatlands to try and make them available for industrial forestry, from some types of agriculture. And in some places, we even use the peat for our own needs as fuel, for heating and cooking. And so we really need to reverse that degradation and restore these peatlands. And so there's massive potential for this in Scotland. And luckily, people can convert this into carbon credits, and this can then be invested in, and landowners there can basically make a living from restoring their land, which is exactly what we need to do to scale things up.
Thanks. So if I'm sitting in this audience, I work for a corporate company, and I'm listening to you now, and I'm thinking, that sounds interesting. I like this systemic approach. How do I get started? Like for, I don't know, some people here who may head the sustainability division of a company or CSR. How do they get started in their company to promote rewilding, or to start promoting and raising awareness to later on maybe invest in this project?
Well, raising awareness is, of course, the first step, and making yourselves familiar, perhaps, and broadening your perspective on what it means to act for nature recovery and this kind of transformative change. And there's plenty of case studies that you can look at. A key point to then move into action is also to consider that although Rewilding Europe is focused on large landscapes, you can do some rewilding at any scale, as long as you're making progress in the right direction. And so if you work for a company or own a company that has some land around your buildings, around your factory, you can do some rewilding there rather than keeping it with a short lawn of fluorescent green grass.
About our campus, for instance, right?
There you go.
So you can do
so you can do some rewilding anywhere. And then, of course, some sectors manage much more land. If you think of the forestry or agricultural and food sectors, massive areas of land there where there's a lot of scope for giving a bit more space to wild nature. So those are sort of very straightforward examples that one can get into.
And is Rewilding Europe actually actively helping these corporates to pass that first stage? Is that something that you do?
We're not an advisory
I'm just trying
firm.
to get people started here.
Yeah. But
you have good case studies maybe to share?
Yes, and we also have a network of rewilding initiatives that we support called the European Rewilding Network.
Okay.
And so there's a whole range of initiatives there that we are not doing ourselves.
Yeah.
But we're bringing these people together to share experiences, learn from each other, and we provide some services to them to help them move forward and scale up and inspire others. And so there's space in there for corporates to engage if they're doing some rewilding.
Okay, great. Thanks you very much. From your perspective, again, if I'm a philanthropic association in the room and also want to invest in this type of projects, what would be the best way to start? Because we see it's really a long-term investment, no strings attached, no outcome-based. So what's the pitch you will give them to still invest and get it done?
That's the key, the long-term thing. Just before going into that, I'm just coming back on Fabien mentioned that the different funding sources, including the climate finance and the carbon offsets. And as a philanthropic engagement, this is not what we are doing.
Exactly,
this is what companies are doing. Philanthropy is supporting Rewilding or any other NGOs for its mission to achieve its mission.
That's right.
So, and that mission is very long-term, decades.
Right.
So I mentioned you need to provide flexibility. You need to understand their needs, be there when they have difficulties or when they need to adapt. So, which means that you have to build that trust relationship with the partners. And in order to be able to do that, you need to also build your in-house capacities. So, if I will encourage other philanthropists to do that, the first thing is really to invest in their capacities and in their resources to be able to engage with these organizations. And it's
meaning
also
concretely hiring biodiversity or nature specialists, like people with an ecological background?
Exactly, yeah. I come from the NGO conservation world, and I've joined the corporate philanthropy, and I think it's a good move from Cartier for nature. And so it's to understand their needs, but it's also you can play a role which goes beyond funding, only beyond signing checks. You can also activate your networks. You can showcase their work. You can make links with other organizations. So you can also play a different role, which goes really beyond only giving money.
Yeah, and so for this particular support that you're providing with Rewilding Europe, what's your dream in terms of what they could achieve? I mean, what would be successful for Cartier for Nature to have achieved maybe in 10 years?
Yeah, I mentioned the 3 pillars that they have an impact on climate, biodiversity, and people. I think that link with biodiversity, nature, and people is really what we care about. We heard this morning Mathieu Ricard mentioning sustainable harmony, and I think that's really resonates with us, the harmony between people and nature, and that's really the impact we are looking for.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Now we are reaching our time here together. So again, here you have a room of changemakers, influential people. So if there is one key message that you would like to, leave them with when it comes to rewilding, what would that be?
Let's do it.
I don't know. Is it clear enough what it is and what you all can do about it? Raise your hands if it's a yes. Good job, guys. What about you, Julien? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's a message of hope. So, yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. So again, if you are interested in rewilding, come and talk to them. They're right here. They can also, they can be reached on the app, but they're right here. You can speak with them. If you're a corporate, want to get started, if you're a philanthropy and you want to invest on the long term for people and the planet, ladies and gentlemen, that was Julien and Fabien. Thank you very much. Yeah, sorry, we're not super. We're going to do that graciously and exit. Merci. So the next speaker that I'm going to bring on stage when the music starts is Felix. Felix is a student, a PhD student in ecology, but he's also the founder of Plant for the Planet. And he started the replanting tree movement when it was nine, when he was a child. And so he's going to come on stage to explain to us how, since then, he's been growing that movement in size and in depth. Felix, come on, over to you. Take it away. Watch out, don't get hurt.
I like to remind myself of the awesome power of forests with this really cool animation from NASA that I hope we'll see in a second here. What we're seeing here is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere over the course of 1 year. We're now in April, and May. So summer is now starting. We're seeing how there's a dip in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. But as autumn and then winter begin, we're now in September, October, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere rises again. Does anyone here have an idea why the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere fluctuates over the course of the year? Well, quite simply, most forests are on the northern hemisphere, and they don't have leaves. The trees don't have leaves in winter. That's why they absorb less CO2. And that's why on all our very familiar atmospheric CO2 concentration trend lines, we always see these annual spikes and dips. But let's go a few steps back. And I want to tell you a bit about the story of Plant for the Planet. 16 years ago, I was a 4th grader, and I was asked to give a little presentation in my class about the climate crisis. And when I prepared for that presentation, I found out about the wonderful Wangari Maathai, who later received the Nobel Peace Prize for her wonderful work. She started a movement called the Greenbelt Movement that planted over 30 million trees over the course of her lifetime. And she used tree planting as a tool for women's empowerment. But 9-year-old me, I didn't understand the true brilliance of her work. I only understood that trees help save the polar bear, and that's why I wanted to plant trees with my friends in my class. In fact, I told my classmates that we kids should plant 1 million trees in each country of the world without knowing what a million was or how many countries existed. But lots of my classmates liked this idea, and that's why a couple of weeks later, we planted our first tree. And that's when we were incredibly lucky, because 2 local journalists reported about this, and this is how some other local schools found out about it, also started planting some trees, and our idea spread. A slightly older student created a very simple ranking on our website that showed which schools had planted the most trees, and lots of schools wanted to outcompete their neighboring schools, and that's how Plant for the Planet spread. And soon these kids participating did a lot more than just plant trees. They started getting involved in lots of other ways by talking to their mayors, talking to the press, talking in front of parliaments. At 3 occasions, our ambassadors even spoke in front of the United Nations, always advocating for doing more to fight the climate crisis. And to empower young people to do exactly that, we've been organizing Plant for the Planet academies. These are one-day workshops where kids learn from other kids what the climate crisis is and what they can do in their schools and their communities to help fight this crisis. And after achieving our initial goal, 1 million trees in each country, in the first country, we started asking ourselves, what's the bigger picture? What shall we do next? And had questions like, how many trees even exist in the world, and how many additional trees do we need to bring back? Well, the first answer is relatively simple. There used to be about 6 trillion trees on Earth. But over the course of the last 10,000 years, we humans have cut down about half of them. So of the 6 billion hectares, the 6 trillion trees that used to exist, we currently have about half of that forest. Now, in a perfect world, we would bring back all of the world's lost forests. But of course, we're also 8 billion people, need a lot of agricultural space. So it's not possible to restore all of that lost forest. But we could bring back about 1/3 of the lost forest without directly competing with agricultural land. So that's roughly the global forest restoration potential. And that's our mission at Plant for the Planet, to increase the world's forest cover by about 1/3. And to give you a sense of what that is, that's about the amount of forest that we lost in the past 100 years. Now, of course, before we can regrow the world's forests, we need to stop losing the world's forests. Now, the good news that many people forget is that we've already made a lot of progress these past few decades towards zero deforestation. The world's peak deforestation level was back in the 80s, where we lost about 30 billion trees every year. We've managed to reduce that to about 1/3 globally, but we're still losing 10 billion trees annually. So there's still a long way to go before we actually have a net positive restoration around the world. And how fast we can improve, we can see on the wonderful example of Brazil, where we witnessed during the first Lula administration, where over the course of less than 10 years, the deforestation rate was reduced by 83%. And hopefully that can happen again, and that would be a main step towards actually achieving net forest regrowth globally. And the reason why I'm so optimistic that we can achieve this and we can actually regrow the world's forests is because agricultural productivity has improved so much over the last few decades that even though the world population is still increasing, we passed peak agricultural land in the early 2000s. So the amount of land we're using for agriculture is receding, which means that forests can now grow again. So we have so much restoration potential, so much land that we need to bring back and restore. Where do we begin? The great team of Strasbourg et al. Published a wonderful paper back in 2020 where they looked at 3 ways to prioritize areas for restoration. We could prioritize the areas that are most needed to protect biodiversity, or the areas that are most needed to fight the climate crisis, or the areas where we can restore forests at the lowest cost. And if we bring all of that together, we have this restoration prioritization area. And we have Plan for the Planet have chosen to focus on one of these red hotspots, the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico, one of the world's biodiversity hotspots. And we're trying to restore and protect about 20,000 hectares of forest on that Yucatan Peninsula. Now, how do we begin such forest restoration work? Even when you plant trees, the work begins much, much earlier than with planting trees. It, of course, initially begins by analyzing your degraded site and then finding a local reference forest. A reference forest is a forest that has very similar characteristics to the site that you're trying to restore, except that it wasn't cut down. So it's basically the forest that you're trying to imitate. And then we send our botanists to that reference forest to analyze the species composition and therefore create the species list that we need for our forest. And for some of the species we need, we can buy the relevant seeds from local distributors, but for the vast majority of these species, those seeds are not available because they're not used for commercial forestry. So we head out into the nearby forests and collect the seeds we need and bring them to our tree nursery. We're currently working with about 41, or with exactly 41 tree species that we're regrowing for this ecosystem. And then they grow somewhere between 3 and 18 months in the nursery until they're then ready to be planted by one of our colleagues. And currently we're working with about 2.5 million trees we're planting there as part of that project every year. And we can slowly see how we are able to restore those degraded sites. But of course, restoration is never smooth sailing. We've got a lot of challenges we're facing there as well. For instance, in 2020, we had one incident where a flood destroyed about 5% of all the trees we had planted until then. We're fighting with forest fires and lots of other challenges that we're experiencing there. But of course, the work continues, and we improve with each one of these challenges. And we've got a big, wonderful team of people working together to restore this forest. But of course, the restoration work, it goes beyond just tree planting and restoring, and we have to have an integrated approach of both restoration and conservation. So we've partnered with the local government to protect a local biosphere reserve of about 500,000 hectares to ensure that we can decrease deforestation there. You can see some of the wonderful species that live in that wonderful reserve. And a while ago, we also realized that our project there on the Yucatan Peninsula is a fantastic opportunity to test novel forest restoration techniques. There are a lot of excellent restoration ecologists with fascinating theories about how we might better restore the world's forests, but without the ability to test their restoration methods at scale. So we've partnered with a couple of such researchers and want to give them that opportunity on the Yucatan Peninsula to set up large-scale experiments to test novel restoration methods. So for instance, one of these experiments consists of about 16,000 trees where we're testing whether by restoring the forest soil microbiome, we can accelerate the growth and the survival rate of trees planted. So we basically planted 16,000 trees. Half of these tree species were inoculated with the soil microbial community from a nearby intact forest, and the other half wasn't. And now we're tracking those two groups of trees and seeing which 8,000 trees are growing faster. That's just one of a series of experiments we're running there in partnership with researchers at ETH Zurich and Imperial College in London and a local research institution called INIFAP from Mexico. Now, you might be wondering how we are funding all of this work. One big part of that answer is through our chocolate, the Change chocolate. This whole project started about 10 years ago when we wanted to partner with the German chocolate industry to plant trees. But no one really wanted to support us. And then one of our young ambassadors, he was 12 at the time, Max, said, let's make our own chocolate, which in retrospect, a ridiculous idea, but we took it seriously back then. That turned into the Change chocolate. It's now the most sold fair trade chocolate in Germany, and all the profits from the chocolate sales go directly to our restoration work at Plant for the Planet. Now, we're working really hard, and we're managing to plant about 2.5 million trees in Mexico every year. But when you think about the global restoration need, that's a ridiculously small amount. We really need to massively scale up our global restoration work. And that's why a while ago we realized that maybe the most effective thing we can do is not just focus on our own restoration work in Mexico and in Spain and in Ghana, but also to help all of the other smaller restoration organizations all across the world. And this is why we developed our Plant for the Planet platform. It's a very simple tool where projects all around the world that are restoring their local forests by planting trees or by using direct seeding or any other restoration method can register their work and showcase their work. And then donors can see exactly what work they're doing and where they're doing it, explore satellite imagery, how these sites are changing over time, and much more. And then if you see a project that you like, you can donate directly to that project through the platform. And importantly, 100% of the donations go directly to the project. We at Plant for the Planet, we don't keep a cut of that money. And of course, to ensure that all of these projects, now over 200 on our platform, are doing their restoration work well, we obviously have on-site reviews where we visit these projects and check their quality. And we've also built an integrated monitoring tool so restoration organizations can see how their forests are developing over time, and donors can see through the platform where the trees are regrowing. And you can explore those projects directly on that platform. So you can see where those trees were planted and exactly what species were planted where in what locations. All this works through our Tree Mapper app, our forest monitoring app. On top of that, we're also about to launch another app, our Fire Alert app, that will send all our projects alerts when a forest fire is detected by one of NASA's satellites in one of their restoration sites. And after we finish that, which will be in a couple of weeks, we'll start working on our third app project, our Seed Manager app. That'll make it much easier for projects to track mother trees in their local project area, see exactly when those trees disperse their seeds, when they can collect seeds from these trees, and then track their seeds in their seed bank. And hopefully, through that, we can encourage many more restoration organizations to plant many more different tree species and therefore have more biodiverse, more intact forests in the long run. So this is what we are trying to do at Plant for the Planet. We're originally a children youth organization. That's still the core of what we're doing, empowering young people so they can be involved in fighting the climate crisis. On top of that, we're trying to restore forests in southern Mexico, in Ghana, and in Spain. But that's really only a very small contribution to what's globally needed. And that's why we built our platform to support all other restoration organizations in hopefully being useful in allowing them to scale up their work. We really have a tremendous challenge in protecting the world's 3 trillion trees and hopefully regrowing another 1 trillion trees. So I hope that many of you will join us in doing just that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, we're supposed to shake hands. Do that. Just thank you very much, Felix. One personal note on that, even though these nature-based solutions in this case are based on youth movement, even less young people can adopt them and champion them. D'accord? I'm not making any judgment on who is in the room, but they are available to all. Here, what you're seeing on the screen is the work of Fanny Didou. I'm not sure where she is. Fanny, she's in the back somewhere. Yes, she's down here, over there, so you don't see her. She's a graphic facilitator, and she's going to capture the conversation through drawings that you will also see throughout the session. That's her job. She's doing a good work. Okay, so in the next session, we're going to be talking about soil erosion and soil degradation. And I'm going to invite on stage, when the music is going to come in, Alain-Richard, Azadeh, and Yann. Please, come and join me on stage. You can sit in the middle. We're going to make that gender balanced. Oh, okay. No, or not. Okay. Or not. Thank you very much for joining us for that important conversation. And just same thing, to set the stage on the topic that is at hand, I wanted to ask you, Alain-Richard, so you're the president of COP15 on desertification, right? So everybody knows there is a COP on climate, there is a COP on biodiversity, but there is a COP on desertification, and I think it's much less spoken of. So can you please enlighten us and tell us what are the main outcomes of that conference of the parties for this important topic? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, there are 3 COPs.
Yeah.
And the COPs are combating desertification and drought. It was less known because it was around drought. Desertification was mainly in poor countries. But today, we are facing drought everywhere. In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in America, everywhere.
Yep.
And last year, the COP was in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. And Côte d'Ivoire has the presidency for 2 years, for a mandate of 2.5 years. And the main outcomes last year was to recognize that there was a need to talk about drought overall.
Yeah, globally.
So globally, so there's an intergovernmental group that has been put up to raise the question of drought all around the world and stop fighting drought by reaction, but being more proactive about drought. The second main achievement of that COP was to talk about gender equality in land restoration and land property.
Yeah.
A lot of countries in Africa and other places around the world, the women have less rights to the soil, especially in rural areas.
You mean in terms of property rights on land, right?
On land, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a declaration at that COP about that and to change things around the world. Another big outcome of that COP was to aim at 1 billion trees planted all around the world from now to 2030.
Yeah.
And a lot of projects have been put up to reach that objective.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much for this. And again, it's just important to say it out loud. In 1992, these 3 branches of environmental issues were separated. God knows why, right? But what we're hearing through all these nature-based solutions is that we need the integration of all these components, climate, biodiversity, and desertification, to really arrive at some results. So thank you for reminding us of that. So you say it's a global challenge. About 40% of land globally is degraded right now.
Exactly.
Can you give us a concrete example in your region of a nature-based solution that helps combat desertification?
Yeah, one important project of the COP15 is, the COP on desertification.
Yeah.
Because COP15 is because it's the 15th meeting.
That's right.
You know, it's every 2 years.
Yeah.
One of the main projects is the Great Green Wall project.
Yeah.
The Great Green Wall project is a project to plant trees from Mauritania, Senegal and Mauritania, up to Djibouti. It's 8,000 kilometers. So that wall could bring a change in all the countries around the Sahel region.
11 countries, right?
11 countries around the Sahel region, which will bring economic development with agriculture, which will bring fun to the poorest people, climate change, of course, by planting trees, but also food security with agriculture. And not only food security, but also security as a whole. Because you know that in those areas around the Sahel, terrorism grows a lot because the communities are poor. The young people don't have a future. So giving jobs to those people will make them less affected by jihadist group. So the security on the whole will be changed, will be improved if we succeed in that project.
Thank you for sharing this illustration. Now, of course, you can all go see and learn more about it, but as we said, here we have illustrations of how working with nature and for nature can really tackle a number of societal problems somewhere. I'm imagining that that's complex, but thanks for actually illustrating the kind of issues that it can help address. Azadeh, welcome. You are the CEO of betterSoil.
That's right.
So you're working on the same problem of soil degradation.
Yes.
Your company is a startup that is operating in that space. Can you tell us what is the solution you're providing and what are the results that you're getting with your solution?
Well, the point is to bring soils into focus. So it means we are losing soil, 10 million hectares of good soil every year on the global scale. And soil is the second largest carbon reservoir on land, on Earth, after ocean. The point is that when oceans absorb carbon dioxide, it's bad. But when soils absorb carbon dioxide, it's good. It's good for soil fertility, it's good for us, because when soils are sick, food quality drops. So this is the aim of our startup, to bring soil again onto focus and say, hey, people, global agenda, you have United Nations, you have COP15, you have a United Nations, CCD, and so on. Why not bringing soil back to the concept or to the focus? Our startup is focusing on only 4 principles, very simple: agroforestry, compost, biochar, and soil management. This is what exactly you said, combining trees with farmlands, bringing back trees to farmlands. This is exactly what Felix said before, that when you plant a tree, you plant one tree, but you see one growing above ground and one growing below ground. So you have massive amount of carbon stored in soil in the ground, what we do not see. So when you can give soils, again, this carbon, this nitrogen, what a tree can absorb, in our 4 principles, we have also a booth here, you can visit us, and also bring back life to soil. Why not? Soils are feeding us. Without a good soil, we have no food production.
And so concretely, betterSoil does regenerate this soil. How? You work on the quality of humus, no? Give us a little bit more details on what is done exactly, so that people then go visit the booth.
Yes, we enhance humus with we have a natural fertilizer. We produce it. For instance, we are startups in Kenya, Malawi, Iran, and also Germany. In Iran, last year we started the production of this natural fertilizer, that we do not put more fertilizer into the soil that we do not need. This is like a very good from trash, bio-waste, everything that we collect and make fertilizer out of it. The other side is to consult farmers, to work with farmers over a long period of time, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, that we together make the soil healthy and strong again. So the one side, production of biofertilizer or natural fertilizer, on the other side, the soil consultancy that we offer to farmers.
Okay, great.
Yes.
And so you know where to go to learn more. Thanks for this. And you make the case for all of us to think more about soil. And there was that documentary, what was it called? Kiss the Ground? No? I don't know.
Yes,
Have you seen that? If you haven't seen that, that's a great documentary. If you don't know the importance of soil, watch it. Kiss the Ground, I think it's called. I don't know if I'm supposed to do PR for that, but that's fine. Yann, thanks for joining us. You work with WWF-France, where you head their work on land biodiversity. Right? You're also a big promoter of integrating approach for soil regeneration. Can you give us, same thing, illustrations about clearly what are some solutions you're promoting with WWF on that front?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, our idea is to say that, of course, we've been forgetting soils for decades or even centuries since the physiocrats in terms of schools of thought. And now soil are coming back to the agenda. And it's important to not see soils just as technical objects, as carbon sinks, but as living organizations, living organisms, and integrated with the ecosystem of living, of plants and animals, and ourselves, farmers, foresters, and so in the focus that we are now giving to the soil conservation, soil restoration, it's important to not forget what's about the model of production, of exploitation, that's above ground. And so in addition to considering the ecology of soil, it's also important to consider the ecology of what's above. How can we reach a good quality of soil? By which kind of practice, of farming model, of forestry model? Who is going to do that? Who is going to get richer? Is it an industrial company abroad, or is it the farmer or the forester owner on the very side? So that's our viewpoint. Of course, I'm sure it's shared quite generally, but we think it's important to not to not consider soil too much as a technical object, but as a living and social object.
So does it mean concretely that when you focus on soil regeneration, your advocacy is for a certain form of agriculture, right? Regenerative agriculture. That's part of your advocacy messages,
exactly,
correct? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And concretely,
a concrete example
what we
then.
do is, for example, we work with the startup that's called Genesis. It's a soil quotation organization that will try to produce an index of soil quality.
Right.
And we work together to make sure that this index will encompass everything in addition to carbon and living organization in soil, but also, again, the ecology, the biodiversity above ground, and, if possible, the farmer model. So, which we are launching today, our first example here.
You mean today?
Yes.
Oh, it's not here. It's not with us. It's in another discussion.
Tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tonight. Okay.
And the idea again is to try to help farmers or forest owners to be able to be rewarded by the business, by municipalities, by charities, for conserving soil quality based on a specific, precise measurement of the soil quality. That's example number one. The number two is also something that we launched today. WWF-France is launching a new fund for forest conservation. In that case, it's not much about planting trees. It's about conserving forests, standing forests. As you know, forests are, how do you say that? The biodiversity of forest is higher the oldest the forest is. So what we need to do is to keep our forest old and let them become old, let's say, at home somehow. So we're trying to fund conservation of standing forests by helping forest owners to keep their forests and to compensate, and then compensating for the loss of revenue, the loss of revenue. Because when you conserve forests, of course, you exploit them less or not at all, and so you lose money or you don't earn that much money. So we're going to compensate that, and that's called, we call it nature impact, and it's a fund that we launched today. We're going to call for tenders for forest projects today. It's been launched this morning. So today we have gathered funds, and we are now looking for projects.
And just let me go back a little bit on that index you mentioned. I can see how So we heard it in the first question, but maybe we can unpack here a little bit. We have carbon credits, right? We know that the whole market for nature credit is being created. And when I'm hearing you talking about this index, I'm thinking about good soil credit coming up through that index. Given the whole backlash there is on these markets that have been created just to make money out of that, and you WWF, so how are you managing that in terms of possible outcomes of using your index?
Of course, we've given that a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
The idea is, of course, to step away from offsetting. Offsetting is a means to reduce your reduction abatement efforts by saying, okay, I'm going to reduce my efforts, and then I will offset what I haven't done, let's say, at
Or
home.
not reducing and buying your way out.
Exactly. So that's not something we want to do.
Okay.
We want to say that, okay, if you want to fund some conservation projects, it's not for offsetting, it's for additional contribution to the national effort. So somehow you donate this work, this effort to the country, to the planet, and it's not to offsetting your own efforts. So that's number one. Number two, it's of course impossible to sell them. Once you funded some conservation, it's absolutely impossible to sell the amounts, the tons of carbon or the hectares of biodiversity you've protected. It's just yours. You can claim you've done that, but you cannot again neither sell it or reduce your effects. And the third idea is to put biodiversity criteria first. Usually, carbon projects are about carbon, and biodiversity is a co-benefit. And we're going to reverse that. We're going to fund biodiversity projects that are going to fund and to conserve standing forests, and carbon will be a co-benefit. Calculated co-benefit, of course, but a co-benefit. So the focus, the onus, will be put on biodiversity.
Yeah, thanks for that. An important debate to follow as these markets are being created, and markets for what in terms of possible outcome. Alain-Richard, I wanted to go back to you when we talk about the role of the private sector and of investment on desertification in particular. When I read about the outcome of COP15 on desertification, one of the discussion was the lack of engagement of the private sector on that particular topic. Everybody's all investing on carbon credits, market solutions, less on desertification. What's the business case for this type of investments?
In a country like Côte d'Ivoire, I will take a country like Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa. We try to make investment in the forest profitable for investors.
Yeah.
How? Côte d'Ivoire lost 80% of its forest in 50 years.
80%
of its forest and the goal now is now we have only 10% of the forest all around Côte d'Ivoire, right? And we have to go up to 20% by 2030. So the big problem was to finance reforestation.
Yeah.
So we tried to have private companies invest in the forest by agroforestry. Agroforestry is a way to finance reforestation, because agriculture can go side by side with the forest.
Yep.
If we have the forest, your agriculture is more profitable. You have more efficiency, more yield. So the country gave private sector concessions.
Okay.
Concessions, land concessions. Okay, and you have the concession for a certain period of time, depending on what agriculture you do on the land. Let's say you plant rubber trees. The rubber tree has a lifespan of 50 years. So the state gives you a concession for 50 years, while you have an obligation to plant trees, forest trees, and your rubber trees.
Okay.
So you earn your income with your rubber exploitation, but at the same time, you plant the trees that are going to stay after you finish. So it's a way to finance reforestation. Because you cannot have private sector coming in forest business if they don't earn money. They have to earn something. So you have agriculture companies that came into that business, but also forest people, because you have an industry of wood industry in Côte d'Ivoire. So you need wood for construction. So the wood industry invests in the forest to secure its input. So you have foresters also investing in the forest to secure the input. The thing that is particular is that the land is owned by the state, not by the farmers. So you don't have a question of land ownership and all that. It's only you deal with the state. For the farmers, same thing. They have an obligation to plant trees in their farm. So it's a concession that is given by the state also to the farmers to have the obligation to plant a certain amount of trees in their farm. So in that way, we succeed. We are succeeding in with the new forest law. We are succeeding in reforesting Côte d'Ivoire. But it's a way to do it that it can be repeated
in other countries.
In other countries.
And are you attracted in international investors for
international
these projects,
investors, local investors also are investing in
international organizations as well? Because that sounds also like the type of things that international organization would be interested in.
International organization is less interested, but private sector is interested.
Okay.
Yeah, the private sector. And we need the financing from the private sector. It's quicker, it's more efficient, and it's a win-win situation.
Thanks. So Azadeh, you're in that space as a startup. I don't know if I can ask you if your startup is already profitable or not, where you are in that. And so that's my first question. Is there room for startups to also be profitable, or at least recover their cost in that space? And is there room for more startup in soil degradation, in fighting soil degradation?
I mean, it should be. Otherwise, we don't have any food to eat in some years.
Yes.
So our population is growing to 10 billion people by the end of century, and we are losing soils. And as I said, no soil, no food. What do we do? So we need to make space for startups to come. We need to give them money. We need to accelerate also the process. As exactly you said, to combine agriculture with forestry, to combine agriculture with other sectors, to bring private sector, make it much more attractive. When they pay, for instance, for planting trees, like as Plant for the Planet does, then it should be also room that we keep the trees, we can then hire people, hire staff to take care of trees, we can make an economic circularity and so on. So without startups or without business that are not profitable for agriculture and forestry, we are losing 10 million hectares good soil every year.
So there's still some space for more to join your proof of concept. People can come see you at your booth to discuss how you got that done. And we are out of time. One last sentence, everybody. I'm just going to ignore this. One last sentence in terms of getting the room here to do something. Just one sentence, please.
Well, let's consider the biodiversity crisis on the par with the climate crisis.
Yeah, thanks for that. Alain-Richard, one final word.
We cannot talk about desertification or drought without talking about climate, without talking about biodiversity. It's a whole.
It's a whole.
So we need to bring awareness to the people, the communities, to the governments, and to the finance.
Thank you. Azadeh?
Don't forget the soil, the second largest carbon reservoir on Earth. That's it.
Don't forget the soil. Yann, Alain-Richard, Azadeh, thank you very much. Oh, and this is, yes, I don't know if I'm supposed to walk you here. Thank you. Come see them. They're right here after, if you're interested in following that conversation. Merci. Merci beaucoup. Our last and final conversation will be on mangrove restoration, another key and very important challenge that we have to tackle. And to talk about that solution, I'm delighted to bring on stage Manuel and Amandine. Please come on in. Hi. Nice to see the two of you. They made the case for soil. We're here to make the case for mangrove. It can seem a little bit far away, maybe for people in the audience. So, Amandine, I'm going to just ask you to, same thing, set the stage, get us started. Give us like the 3 top global facts on mangrove, just so that we know what we're talking about.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Who have seen mangrove in his life? Yeah. Wow.
Oh, people travel.
Wow, okay. You traveled. You've taken the plane. Did you?
We don't have mangrove in Europe.
We don't have mangrove in Europe because growing in tropical areas is really a forest which is between the ocean and the terrestrial areas. So it can grow in very constrained situation with salted and unsalted water. The bad news is that mangroves have been destroyed largely, and we're going to talk about it. But the good news is that we still have huge surface of mangroves. Today, we have still the size of Bangladesh. It's huge. It's a huge country. So there's still hope. What we need to know, too, is that mangrove has a high potential for climate, for carbon. It's 3 to 5 times more sequestration capacities that mangroves have compared to temperate forests, for instance. Why? Because it's going into the soil. So we just talked about the soil. And mangrove, it's not only climate impact, but it's also biodiversity, it's also social impact. So it's a beautiful ecosystem around mangroves. What's interesting is that 1 million people are living thanks to mangrove. There are fishermen, there are communities, and they are taking the fish out of this amazing forest. What's also interesting is that in the country where we operate Planète Urgence, we can see an amazing biodiversity that you can only see in mangroves area. Speaking about the manatee, le lamentin, speaking about proboscis monkey, it's le singe nasique, c'est un gros nez, il est incroyable ce singe. Yeah. So there are an amazing impact of mangrove. Good news, we still have mangroves.
We still have them, so we should keep them. Thanks very much, Amandine, for getting us started to set the scene. Mr. Mayor, you are the mayor of Quelimane. And so can you bring that home for your job as a mayor? How are mangroves essential to your city and to its citizens?
Well, thank you very much for having him here. Well, I grew up as a child cutting mangroves to help my fathers pay for my studies. Because we used to cut mangroves either to transform them into coal or to help to produce a certain kind of alcohol which was coming out of sugarcane. So that's how I helped my parents to pay for my studies. I only learned about the other importance of mangrove as she just clearly put forward after I became a mayor. And I became a mayor in 2011 in my city. And Quelimane city is like 600,000 inhabitants. It's a coastal city. Yeah. And as she said, mangroves are between the sea and the other development area. So one of the biggest challenges that I faced as a mayor were the constant flooding. Yeah. Because my city was built, as I said, it's a coastal city, and it was built on a swamp. Sometimes I ask, who was the crazy guy who decided to build it there? Because most of the time we get flooded, not only from the rainfall, but also from the sea rise. And actually, on the 12th of March of this year, we were hit heavily by Cyclone Freddy. Yep. And as one of the consequences was that most of my city, almost 2/3 of my city, was literally flooded, not only from the rainfall, but mainly from the sea level. In some of the poorest areas of my city, we had salt water coming into the people's house 1.5 meters of salt water passing through, taking in everything from houses, from infrastructure, destroying schools, health clinics, and so on. So I became aware of the importance of the mangroves because over the years, when we looked at what was happening was that the areas where people cut mostly the mangroves actually coincided or were the areas that were where the impact of the constant flooding was more severe. So then we started making the link or looking the reasons, and we found out that actually mangroves were the first line of defense against erosion, against flooding, but also as 6% of the citizens of my city, they get their income from the fishing industry. We realized over the years that their livelihood were becoming affected because less and less food were able of being captured, and therefore their income were year after year falling. So we started taking attention to understand the importance of mangroves to my city.
I mean, the example that you mentioned about the cyclone reminds us also of the urgency of investing in this restoration of this ecosystem. And I mean, it wasn't the only cyclone over the past year, right? It was the third or fourth,
right? In the last 4 years, more than 5 cyclones hit Mozambique. And actually, the meteorological services this year, they announced that from January to June, about 10 cyclones will hit the coastal side of my country, Mozambique. And my city, being a coastal city, is actually one of the most vulnerable cities. This year we had Cyclone Freddy. In the last 2 years we had Cyclone Anna, we had Cyclone Makwakwa, we had Cyclone Idai in 2019, we had Cyclone Kennedy. So I mean, you just count them. Now we are like, even children at school, they're learning how to deal with cyclone, and we are having programs directed at the youngsters, at students, but also at women, because we understand that every year we are going not only to have more cyclone, but the cyclones are becoming more intense. And therefore the consequences are really very hard
for you. And so when you took office as a mayor, you designed a master plan for the city of Quelimane. And so you included mangrove restoration as part of that master plan. Can you give us a concrete illustration of what that means, what's embedded in that master plan?
Over the years, I realized that we needed something to help us deal with these challenges. Because when I took office, we didn't have the city didn't have an updated master plan. And I literally felt as a pilot of a boat on a high sea during a storm or a cyclone and without a boussole. In that circumstances, you don't know if you should head your boat to the north, to the south, to east, or to west. Like you are there, you just know that you need to save your boat and the people or the goods which are there, but you don't know what to do. So we started discussing with different stakeholders at local, but also at the regional and national level, that what is the main or the best instrument that we could introduce that would help us and serve as a guideline towards trying to manage. Because to me, climate change is primarily a developmental issue. So we came up with a master plan. Actually, it took us almost 8 years to have it because we didn't have either the human expertise or the financial resources to have a master plan. And for example, in my country, the law requires to have a master plan, the law requires that more than 10 national specialists be involved in it. And central government don't provide that resource. So you need to find the resources yourself, if you are a city, and fly in more than 7 times, more than 10 people from the capital to your city. And actually my city is 1,800 kilometers from the capital. So you need to bring about 8 times 10 people flying to your city,
Yeah, that sounds
which
like a
I mean,
headache,
it's adding costs for having such vital instrument that helps any mayor or any local government to manage the city. But after all, we managed to come up with the human and the financial resources. So we have the master plan. In this master plan, the main outcome of the master plan was to have nature-based solutions as an integrated part and as one of the pillars of this very important instrument. And the issue of mangroves became then of a paramount importance, and it's like the bulk of our master plan.
And it's also generating, as we were discussing earlier, some local employment to take care of the nurseries. So it's also engaging your citizens of your city.
Definitely,
developing and
it brought a new kind of activism, be it for students, be it for, because we are creating what we call youth clubs, student clubs, but also local disaster management teams in different locations in my city, so as to equip women, equip the youth, but also equip the local community with instruments, but more important, with awareness and knowledge about this phenomenon and about the importance and how to deal with a disaster when it comes and why mangroves are important. I recall in one of those meetings where we are trying to raise awareness, when one of my citizens came up and he asked me, but Mr. Mayor, I don't understand, do mangroves vote? And the question there was that, why are you so worried with mangroves instead of concentrating your efforts in finding livelihood to us? I had to explain them. Mangroves do not vote directly, but if you cut mangroves, and people cut mangroves for different reasons. One is because they are poor. They need mangroves either for cooking or to build their own houses. I mean, they say, we understand, mangroves are important to build our houses, for cooking, because they are also a breeding space for fish, so that the biodiversity importance. They are not stupid, they understand it. But the question is, what are the alternatives? And when they asked me, do mangroves vote? The question was, why don't you care about
me?
About me, you care about mangroves. So I had to explain that by caring about mangroves, I'm caring about them. And actually themselves, they should be caring about mangroves because mangroves do affect their own livelihood, their income, but also mangroves are the first line of defense to my city. If we didn't have mangroves, today my city would have disappeared. As other cities in my own province, like Chinde, which was a very developed city, disappeared.
Thank you so much. To make sure that Amandine get a chance also to give some of this illustration, maybe from other parts of the world. With Planète Urgence, you also invest in mangrove restoration. So can you give us concrete example of what you do with your organization to
and I'm dreaming that many cities we are working with are doing the same thing as mayor. Yes, Planète Urgence is an NGO, so we are, our focus is really to protect and restore forests, and we are working where it matters. So first, where you have vulnerabilities of people, it can be climate change, it can be economic vulnerabilities. We also focus where deforestation is and richness of biodiversity.
Okay.
And one of the examples is in Cameroon. So Cameroon, Douala, capital economic, you have 4 million people, and you have inundation, which are more and more common in the city, 3 to 4 times per year. So it's the same case. We see climate change, we see that water is coming. But the reason here is that mangroves have been damaged strongly, 66% of the mangrove around the city. And before, the mangroves used to play a role of buffer, used to play a role of like sponge, and it's not existing anymore because people are cutting for firewood, they smoke the fish. So the situation is we need to restore an equilibrium between the people and the mangroves. So we are working with the support of the local actors like the mayor of Douala, but also local chefs, traditional chefs. It's very important to go village by village and to discuss with the traditional chef. It can be also with a group of women, group of young people, and with the support of funders. So the group Orange and SIA partners are supporting us to be able to go at scale and to restore 1,000 hectares of mangroves beside the conservation. So what's important in this kind of project, as you were saying, is really to recreate the connection in terms of livelihoods. Yep. It's not only to restore, but it's really to create the condition of the sustainability of what you're doing. And the only sustainability which is possible is to create a link. If the people love mangroves, if they understand mangroves, if the kids are going to see mangroves, if they see this proboscis monkey in the trees, they will love it and they will protect it. If the people are living, earning their life thanks to mangrove, they will protect it. So it's exactly what we are trying to do.
So in terms of how Planète Urgence operate, how is that different from, let's say, a classic development project where a big international organization comes to restore the mangrove in the same location? How are you yourself operating differently from that?
We are really a field-based organization. What we do is to understand where it matters the most, because today we have no choice but to do some priorities.
Right.
We can't do everything. We can't take all solutions for good solution. We need to go where it matters, what will have an effect.
It means you're mapping the most degraded areas and focusing on that.
Exactly. So we're doing mapping country by country. And in the country, we will work with the local authorities, we will work with the local actors. We always look for local actors. You have amazing NGOs, you have amazing organizations everywhere. They are locally based, they know the culture, they know the people.
And they're already doing that job.
So let's try to empower these people. Let's try to give them the tools to succeed. So we're here to coordinate. Sometimes we do a little bit more than coordination. We have to. But most of the time we find amazing partners locally and we work with them. And our team are organizing and giving the capacity to really act. We're also using volunteering. So if you're from companies, we do have some volunteers from companies who come to bring expertise. Because when you're in the field, as you were saying, you don't have sometimes organizational expertise, marketing, or when you do cooperative.
So what you're calling for people in the room is there opportunity for fundings for corporates? You're already working, for instance, with 2 corporates that you mentioned, but also potentially, men and women power and support to go work in this community through the CSR corporate programs, for instance.
Yes, we do employee engagement.
Okay, so the two of you, when you discuss about the importance of restoring mangroves for livelihoods, you also say that they are cut down for livelihoods, right? So there is this trade-off. It's cut to live, and yet you need it to live. So how is that managed at the level of your project? How are you managing that? Is that through awareness raising also, or how does that work?
It's a mix, and it's the most complex part because
yes, chicken and egg here, right?
Yeah, rewilding or restoring mangroves area, it's easy. You have the seeds hanging in the trees, you take it, you put it in the ground, in the good areas, and it's growing. We are in tropical areas, so it's growing very fast during all year. What is really important is the sustainability. So it's a really personalized approach. It's really depending of what is the culture around mangrove? In some countries, there are some non-scientist way of seeing things. So we need to adapt to
working with local community.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, how do you deal with this trade-off? And that will if you can keep it short because we're already out of time. That's concrete for you because you need to be elected also to continue the work, right? So how do you deal with that?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, I think it's engaging those you want to work with and you want actually to better their lives. You need to listen to them. Because most of the times we think that we know everything. But what I've learned is that by listening, you learn much more. And actually, you get the ownership. And once they own the project, once they understand the reason why you are doing what you are doing or why you are preaching what you are preaching, then they will embody it, they will take it as their own challenge. And I think that that will be halfway for success. So to me, listening and really implementing what you are hearing from the ground is of a paramount importance for any kind of project to succeed.
Thank you very much. Tomorrow you're here as part of the mayor group. Is that one of the topics that you'll be bringing up? How to integrate environment and people for a city? Is that
definitely. But also leadership by doing it. Because most of the times people say, and then when they go back, they don't practice what they are preaching. So people need to see that you are doing what you are preaching, which is very difficult. Because if the local citizens, they don't have energy, definitely the mayor has got energy at his home. Like the house of the mayor is in a better condition and it's not made out of the mangrove. So how do you translate, how do you resonate what you are saying with your own lifestyle? I think that's, to me, its core.
Thank you very much. One last word, Amandine, from you as we wrap up on the importance of mangrove restoration.
Yes, mangrove seems to be very far away, even if you've been there for some of you. But they are really core for our planet, and I really believe that we have plenty of solutions. But this one is natural. It's almost free. It's easy. So let's do it really, really at a huge level, huge scale.
And let's invest in mangroves. Amandine, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
Someone managed to wrap everything up for you. You find all these fantastic speakers online, and they're here in the room. Grab them, engage with them, and hopefully this session gave you a few illustrations of what nature-based solutions are and how nature can work for the well-being of all of us. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.